Hey youth and youth families, you came back. Here we are at Table Talk, and we are talking about serving this week. And hey, as we've talked about some of the really tough stuff about serving, why don't we talk a little bit about something a little bit different today? I want to talk about some of the challenges that we might face, and maybe even some of the dangers or fears that we might have. And probably one of the biggest, when we're thinking about getting active in our faith, a lot of people express that they are concerned about burnout. So today we're talking about not becoming weary in doing good. Galatians chapter 6 says something really great on this. I'm looking at verse 9. It says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially those who belong to the family of believers." So I want to talk about 3 ways to guard against burnout or weariness. Number 1, whatever you do, do it for the love of God, not for others. Because you're going to have a tough time outgiving God. Anyway, next, I'd like to talk about the idea of doing less versus doing right. That will be a good one. Let's talk about that. And then finally, we'll talk about when the harvest comes, just taking a little bit of time to really enjoy it. So let's jump into that. Doing for the love of God. You know what? There is a person that I need to tell you about who really inspires me, and that's the custodian here at Grace. Her name is Natalia. And man, you talk about someone who's got depth of character. She's the one. Because here's what I did. One time, I remember it was like a Wednesday morning, and she was vacuuming the church. I went to her and I said, "You know, Natalia, you don't really need to vacuum the carpets for Wednesday, because you know what, it's a bunch of youth who are totally okay with there being a little bit of whatever on the floor. You know, and to tell you the truth, I don't know if anyone would notice if it was vacuumed or not vacuumed," but she worked really hard at that. And you know what she said to me? She says, "You know what, I don't vacuum for the youth or for the church." She says, "I vacuum because I love Jesus." Natalia will clean and clean and clean and go way beyond what she's even asked to do, simply because she loves Jesus, and she obviously loves him a lot. And I'm always impressed at watching her do these tasks over and over again that would completely burn me out. But for some reason, it doesn't burn her out. Why? Because she's really discovered what it is to serve for her love of Jesus. You know, one of the dangers that we face of burnout is when we start to serve out of a sense of duty. But if we take the example of Natalia, and I watch her character and how she operates, you know, and how she serves out of a love for Jesus, you know what? I want to be like that. Now let's talk a little bit about this idea of doing less versus doing right. Because see, I remember a few years back, I went to this soul care seminar, and you know what? Sometimes I don't really enjoy some of these, because I feel that there's a little bit of part of me that's pretty driven at times. And I don't like it when I go to these seminars and they just say, "Oh, you need to do less and take rest," and stuff like that, because I don't rest well. But I really appreciated what this presenter shared, because he opened up with just kind of a warning. And he was a guy who said he had suffered a mental breakdown from some of the stress and pressure. And I was like, oh, he's going to tell me, do less. And he said this to us. He says, "You know what? Everyone used to always preach to do less. But he says, I want to share something different with you." He says, "I want to preach to you to do right." And here's the illustration that he used. He says, when you're driving in a car, and I wonder how many of you have had the chance to drive a standard, a manual transmission. In a manual transmission, you can hear the engine getting louder and louder. The RPMs are going up and up and up. And if you rev them too high, they get into what's called the red line, and it becomes a little dangerous that you might blow your engine, sort of thing. So you've got 2 options. You can take your foot off the accelerator and let those RPMs come down, do less. Or what's the other thing that people do? They put in the clutch, they shift the gear, and you know, you can continue on and you can actually do more and more and more. I think that's one of the areas where we often get things wrong, is we go hard, and we think that our options are either go hard and burn out or do less. But sometimes what we need to do most to avoid burnout is actually maybe do something different, do the right thing, shift the gear, work within our giftings and stuff like that. Let me tell you another story. I remember actually someone that was in high school, and she came to work with me when I was working at Children's Camps International. Wonderful, awesome girl. I loved working with her. She was just so much fun to work with, was a fantastic personality. But I could tell that she was getting tired, really weary. And I remember sitting down with her one time and I just asked her some of the questions, where do you feel most alive when you're serving God? And she started to describe some of the areas where she really felt God was working in her and some of the times when she felt most alive. And one of the things I started to hear was, these weren't the things that I was asking her to do. The job that I had given her was different than what her gifting was. And I remember saying, I looked at her and I says, you know what? How would you feel about just wrapping up what we're doing here? We can put it all on pause. And if you would like to do something different, why don't we find you something different? And she just let out this big sigh because she didn't want to disappoint me by quitting the job, because she loved what we were doing. However, she knew that she was outside of her gifts and she was burning out. She was miserable in doing some of these things. Even though she loved God and loved what we were doing, it wasn't her gifting. And so I said, why don't we just take a week or two, wrap this all up, and why don't you go on and do the things you really love to do? And she is doing fantastic. It seems like such a small but such a huge thing. If you feel like you're coming to a place where you're serving and really getting weary, I wonder if you might consider, is it time to not just take your foot off the accelerator, but maybe shift a gear? Something to consider. Finally, the last thing I want to talk about is that when the harvest comes, to take a little bit of time to enjoy it. I believe that God built something into our work routines, right from his own work in creating, all that we see. He took the seventh day and he took a break. He took a Sabbath rest. And now one thing I want to just highlight here is I don't think that Sabbath is just about stopping our work. I think Sabbath is also about reflecting and evaluating and giving thanks. That passage that we talked about from Galatians here, it said something like this. It said, in the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. That good will come, that we shouldn't get wearied from doing this. But coming to the time when harvest comes, I think it's okay to take a break, take a Sabbath, and reflect, what did God do? When he took a break from his work, he looked at what had been done and he enjoyed it. He said it was good. It's important for us to hold these values as we're serving, to realize that there is a goal ahead, that harvest, and when harvest does come, to take pause and reflect on it and just enjoy it because it's good. I hope that you've learned something about serving this last week. I sure do appreciate you coming to hang out with me, and I just want to wish you blessings on your day.